The night pressed in like a heavy worn-out coat, cold, frayed at the edges, and impossible to ignore. Megan tightened her grip on the paper bag in her hand, its warmth barely cutting through the numbness of her fingers. Her shoes, scuffed and soaked from a leaking gutter she hadn't seen in the dark, slapped against the sidewalk as she walked. The diner had closed late, and she'd stayed behind to help clean, not because it was her job, but because no one else had. That's the kind of person Megan was: quiet, steady, invisible to most, but always stepping in where others didn't. She hadn't eaten since morning. The sandwich in her hand was supposed to be her reward for getting through the day without breaking just turkey and cheese, a little mustard, wrapped in butcher paper. It was all the kitchen had left. She hadn't planned to give it away, but life doesn't wait for plans. As she turned onto a quieter street, the kind with cracked pavement and flickering lamps, she saw her, a tiny figure sitting on the edge of the sidewalk, legs folded tightly, jacket swallowed up around her frame like it belonged to someone twice her size. Her hair was a wild halo of curls, and her face carried something Megan had seen in the mirror too many times. Exhaustion, but not the kind that came from work, the kind that came from waiting for something that never arrived. Megan slowed to a stop, blinking, unsure if what she saw was real or the exhaustion playing tricks. But the girl didn't vanish. She sat still, unmoving, hugging her knees to her chest like she was trying to disappear into herself. "Hey there," Megan said gently, her voice cutting softly through the night air. The girl looked up, big green eyes, tired, haunted. She didn't say anything at first, just stared. Then, with a voice so small Megan almost missed it, she whispered, "I'm waiting. For who, sweetie?" Megan crouched down, careful not to frighten her. "My mommy," she said to wait. "She said she'd come back." The words dropped like stones in Megan's chest. She looked around, no one, no nearby cars, no strollers, no purse left behind. Just the child and the wind. "Do you know how long you've been here?" Megan asked. The girl shrugged. "Since the sun was up?" Megan felt her stomach twist. That had been hours ago. She looked down at the sandwich in her hand, then back at the girl. Her own hunger flared up at the smell still leaking from the paper. She hadn't eaten in almost 12 hours. But the child's lips were cracked, her cheeks streaked with something that might have been dirt or maybe dried tears. Without thinking too hard, Megan unwrapped the sandwich, tore it into 3 pieces, and handed 2 of them to the girl. "Here, you look hungrier than me." The child stared at the food for a moment, as if unsure if it was real. Then she took it with both hands and bit down. The look on her face, pure relief, like someone breathing after almost drowning, told Megan everything. "What's your name?" she asked after a moment. "Sophie?" "Well, Sophie," Megan said with a soft smile, "my name is Megan, and I think we should get you somewhere warm, okay?" Sophie didn't answer, just kept chewing, her eyes drifting shut for a moment, like she was afraid she'd wake up and it would all disappear. Megan looked around again. She knew what she should do: call the police, wait for social services, follow protocol. But this wasn't a textbook situation. This was a real girl sitting in the cold, shivering. "Lost?" She stood up slowly and extended her hand. Sophie stared at it. "It's okay," Megan said, her voice as calm and warm as she could manage. "You can trust me." And then slowly, a small hand slipped into hers. Megan's apartment was nothing special, a cramped space above a hardware store, with creaky floorboards and a heater that rattled like it might give out any minute. But it was warm and safe. And right now, it was more than Sophie had. She led her inside, helped her out of the oversized jacket, and sat her down in a chair that had seen better days. Then Megan got to work. She filled a small plastic tub with warm water and grabbed a spare t-shirt that could double as a nightgown. She didn't have much, but she had enough. Sophie said nothing as Megan gently wiped her face, washed her hands, and tried to comb through the knots in her hair. She didn't flinch, didn't complain, only blinked slowly, like she couldn't quite believe what was happening. "You know," Megan said, trying to lighten the mood, "you remind me of someone I once met. A dragon." Sophie's eyes widened, just slightly. "Not a scary one," Megan continued. "He liked oatmeal raisin cookies, wouldn't eat anything else. I had to bribe him with a whole box just to get him to stop guarding a rainbow." A small sound escaped Sophie's lips, a giggle, soft, faint, but real. Megan smiled. That sound alone made her feel like maybe the day hadn't been such a loss after all. Later, with Sophie tucked into a warm blanket and holding a cup of milk, Megan finally picked up her phone and called the local station. Not 911, just the department line. "I found a little girl," she said quietly, "alone on Maple and 6th. No sign of her parents. I brought her home to warm up. Her name's Sophie. We'll send someone," came the response. "She'll speak. Does she know where she lives?" "She said her mom told her to wait, that she'd be back." A pause then. "You did the right thing, ma'am. Someone will be there shortly." Megan hung up and turned back to Sophie, who had already fallen asleep on the couch, her fingers still curled around the edge of the blanket like she was afraid it might be taken from her. There was something about that little girl, something that made Megan's chest ache in a way she couldn't explain. She wasn't used to anyone depending on her, Not since her dad passed and her mother left everything behind, including Megan. She'd grown up fast. She'd worked hard for everything, and now, even though her life was a constant struggle, she had learned to survive. But this wasn't about survival. This was about something deeper. She didn't know who Sophie really was. She didn't know what had happened to her mother, or why a child was left alone on a street corner in the cold. But she knew this. She would not let Sophie go back out into that night. Not while she still had breath in her body. Outside, the city slept. The wind howled down empty alleys. But inside Megan's tiny apartment, something had shifted. To strangers both alone. Both broken in their own way had found each other, and neither of their lives would ever be the same again. What Megan didn't know, as she sat beside the sleeping child, was that Sophie's disappearance had triggered a silent storm. Far across town, in a penthouse office lit by city lights and the glow of a dozen monitors, a man stared at a photograph on his desk. A little girl, green eyes, bright with laughter. His daughter, gone without a trace, and no one, not the police, not his private security, not even his closest advisors had been able to find her. Not yet, but he would. And when he did, he would find something more than just his daughter. He would find the woman who had saved her, and everything he thought he knew about kindness, about fate, about life itself, would unravel. Forever. The knock came just after midnight. It wasn't loud, but in Megan's tiny apartment, every sound echoed. She sat up from the floor where she had been dozing beside the couch, her body stiff from the hard surface, her mind still fogged from sleep. Sophie stirred but didn't wake. The little girl had curled herself into a ball, her small hands still tucked under her cheek, the borrowed blanket wrapped tightly around her like a cocoon. Megan moved quietly, careful not to startle the child, and crossed the creaky floor. Her heart thudded as she approached the door. 3 slow knocks at this hour couldn't mean anything good. She pressed her eye to the peephole. A uniformed officer stood in the hallway, flanked by a woman with a clipboard and tired eyes. Megan opened the door slowly. "You called about a missing child?" the officer asked, his voice gentle. "Yes. Her name is Sophie. She's sleeping." The woman with the clipboard nodded. "Can we come in?" Megan stepped aside, heart suddenly tightening. A strange wave of panic welled in her chest, though she wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the look on the woman's face, polite but distant, like Sophie was already becoming a case file instead of a little girl who had just started to smile again. "She was alone when I found her," Megan explained as they entered. "Sitting on the curb at Maple and 6th, she said her mother told her to wait, but she didn't come back. She hadn't eaten all day." The social worker crouched by the couch, careful not to wake Sophie, while the officer jotted something down in a notepad. The heater rattled in the corner. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the city outside. "She's safe now," the woman said softly. "You did a good thing." Megan nodded, but her chest ached. Something in her wanted to reach out, pull Sophie back, say no, not yet. The child had clung to her hand, trusted her. She wasn't ready to let that go. "She doesn't know where she lives," Megan said quietly. "She doesn't know her mom's number. She's scared." The officer looked up. "We'll take her to Child Protective Services. They'll look after her until we can locate a guardian." Megan swallowed. She understood the process, but it felt wrong too fast. "To final. She's been through something. I can see it in her eyes," she added. "Please, be gentle with her." The social worker nodded. "We'll do our best." But Megan had heard that phrase before. It didn't mean what people thought it meant. It was a sentence used to soften what always came next. Separation, change, uncertainty. Still, she helped them lift Sophie carefully, wrapped her tighter in the blanket. The little girl murmured something in her sleep, her small face creasing for a second before she settled again. Megan brushed a curl from her forehead. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and then silence. For the first time in hours, Megan was alone. The apartment felt colder than before, emptier somehow. She sat back on the couch where Sophie had just been, and stared at the folded piece of paper she hadn't realized the social worker had left on the table. A contact number, a name, a place where she could check in. She held it in her hand for a long time. Across the city, in a towering building wrapped in glass and steel, Adrian Keller stood at the edge of his office, staring at the surveillance footage his team had just pulled from a traffic camera near Maple and 6th. The grainy video showed a small child sitting on the curb, knees pulled tight to her chest. And then a young woman approached. Not a cop, not a city worker, just a girl with tired eyes and a paper bag in her hand. He watched her kneel, speak, offer something. Food, maybe. The child ate, then reached out, took her hand. He paused the video there, zoomed in. The woman's face was slightly blurred, but something in her expression stopped him cold. Compassion, real, honest compassion. Adrian hadn't seen that in years, not from strangers, not even from people he paid. "She found Sophie," he murmured, more to himself than to the private investigator sitting quietly on the other side of the room. "She brought her to safety." The investigator replied, "Called the local precinct. Social services picked up the girl an hour ago. She's in holding now, waiting for transfer in the morning." Adrian's jaw tightened. "I want that woman's name. We're working on it." The footage only shows her face for a few seconds, but we've already narrowed it down to 3 addresses on that street. She brought the girl into one of them second floor above a hardware store. Adrian turned back to the screen. He'd built empires, bought companies, crushed rivals, made billions. But all of that meant nothing since Sophie vanished. And now, here was a girl, a stranger who had done what all his power couldn't. She found his daughter, not just found her. She fed her, held her, stayed. I want to meet her, he said, voice quiet but firm. I'll set it up. Back in her apartment, Megan barely slept. Morning came too soon, gray and silent. She moved like a ghost through her morning routine, boiling water for tea, folding the blanket Sophie had used, staring too long at the empty couch. Something about that child had settled into her heart like a whisper that refused to fade. Looked at the contact slip again. She couldn't explain it, but she needed to see her again, just to know she was okay. By noon, she was standing outside the social services building, tall and sterile. Glass doors humming with people coming and going. She stepped inside, stomach tight with nerves. Hi, I'm checking in on a child who was brought in last night. Her name is Sophie. The receptionist typed something, frowned. Sorry, that child was already picked up. Megan's heart stuttered. Picked up by who? I'm not authorized to release that information, the woman said flatly. She was abandoned in the cold, Megan said, her voice rising. I found her. She was alone for hours. You can't just let her go with anyone. The receptionist's eyes narrowed. Ma'am. She was released to her legal guardian. Her mother? Megan asked, but the woman didn't answer. Outside, Megan sat on the steps, stunned. She didn't know why this hit her so hard. She should have been relieved. The system had worked. Sophie was with family, and yet something didn't sit right as she stared at the sidewalk, trying to make sense of the hollow feeling in her chest. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The back door opened. Megan Rhodes? A voice called. She looked up. A man in a suit stepped out, tall, with steel gray eyes and a presence that made people pause without knowing why. Yes, she said, slowly rising. My name is Adrian Keller, he said. I believe you found my daughter. Just like that, the world shifted again. She stared at him, mind spinning. The name sounded familiar. Keller, the real estate empire. Hotels, international projects, billionaire lists. You're her father? He nodded once. I've been searching for her for 2 days. You were the one who stayed. Megan didn't know what to say. All her questions tangled together at once. She didn't mention a father, she said softly. Only her mom. Adrian's jaw clenched. She and I are separated. Her mother and I had disagreements about custody, but she's safe now, and that's because of you. Megan blinked. Is she okay? She's better than okay, he said, and I'd like to thank you. I don't need anything, Megan replied quickly. I understand, he said, but I do. There was something in his eyes, not just gratitude, something else, a kind of recognition, like he saw something in her he hadn't expected to find. He extended a card. If you ever need anything, anything at all, call me. She stared at it. Adrian Keller. And underneath, a private number. SS car pulled away. Megan stood in the street, card in hand, heart thudding. She didn't know what this meant, or what was coming, but something had changed, and deep down she knew. Her life would never be ordinary again. The days that followed felt like a dream Megan couldn't quite wake up from. She returned to her routine coffee at dawn. The clatter of dishes at the diner, long hours on her feet and short breaks in the back alley just to breathe. But nothing felt the same. Every time the bell above the door jingled, her heart jumped. She kept looking for green eyes, for curls, for the soft voice that had once whispered, I'm just waiting. But Sophie didn't come through the door again. Instead, it was the memory of her that lingered, tiny fingers wrapped around a sandwich. The way she had leaned against Megan's arm like it was the safest place in the world. She had trusted her. Megan had held that trust like something sacred. And then, in one quiet night, it had vanished into the hands of strangers. And yet, she couldn't stop thinking about the man who had come to find her, Adrian Keller. His name echoed like a drumbeat in her head. Wealthy, powerful, the kind of man who didn't ask for things, he commanded them. But that night on the sidewalk outside social services, he hadn't looked like a man in control. He had looked haunted. She hadn't called the number he gave her. She told herself she didn't belong in that world. But the truth was, part of her didn't want to believe that chapter was closed. Something deep inside her whispered that Sophie's story, their story, wasn't finished yet. And she was right. It happened 3 nights later. She had just closed the diner. The last light flickering off behind her as she stepped out into the cool evening. The street was quiet. She walked with her head down, thinking of bills and rent and how many eggs she could afford this week. Then she saw it. A sleek black car parked near the corner. She stopped in her tracks. The back window lowered, slowly, revealing a familiar pair of steel gray eyes. Megan, her name, spoken softly, like a promise. Adrian stepped out of the car, his coat immaculate, his shoes polished, but something about him looked worn, not his clothes him. Like sleep had become a stranger, like his mind had been racing in circles since the last time they met. I didn't expect to see you again, Megan said, her voice uncertain. I hoped you would call, he replied. but I understand why you didn't." There was a pause. Then he added, "May I walk with you?" She nodded, and together they walked, their footsteps echoing against the quiet pavement. "I wanted to thank you again," he said, "but I also wanted to tell you something." Megan glanced at him. "Is Sophie okay?" He hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. "She's safe," he said finally, "but she's not speaking." Megan's breath caught. "She hasn't said a word since she came home," Adrian continued. "She won't eat much, won't sleep alone. She keeps asking for the girl with the sandwich." Megan stopped walking. "She remembers me. She remembers only you," he said. "She won't even let the therapist near her unless she has that blanket you wrapped her in." Megan's heart ached. "She's just scared. She's been through something no child should." "I know," Adrian said quietly, "and I don't know how to reach her. She's my daughter, but I wasn't the one who made her feel safe." A silence fell between them, the kind of silence that carried weight. "You want me to see her?" Megan said finally. "I want you to come to the house," he answered. "Just once, just to see if it helps." Megan looked away, unsure. She was a waitress, a nobody. She didn't belong in mansions or luxury estates. But then she thought of Sophie's cracked lips, her small hands clutching a sandwich, her voice when she whispered, "Thank you." "I'll come," she said softly. For her, Adrian gave a small nod. "I'll send a car tomorrow at 9. The next morning, she stood on the sidewalk in her best clothes, which wasn't saying much, her hair neatly tied back, her hands trembling. When the black car pulled up, the driver opened the door with a bow. The house was nothing like she expected. It was massive, yes, but not cold, not sterile. It was warm, with tall windows and sunlight streaming through old trees. A place that had once been filled with laughter, but now felt too quiet. A woman met her at the door, kin-faced in her 60s, dressed plainly. "I'm Lydia," she said. "I've worked for the Kellers since Adrian was a boy. Sophie's upstairs." Megan climbed the winding staircase slowly, her breath catching as she reached the nursery door. It was cracked open. Inside, Sophie sat on the floor, surrounded by toys she didn't touch. Her hair was brushed, but her eyes were distant. Her arms hugged the blanket Megan had given her, clutching it to her chest like armor. Megan stepped into the room and whispered, "Hey, sunshine." Sophie's head jerked up. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, without a word, she launched herself across the room and wrapped her arms around Megan's neck. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just held on. Megan knelt, their arms around the child, feeling her tiny body press close, her heart beat fast and trembling. Behind them, Adrian watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable. Megan looked up. "She's holding everything and she doesn't know how to let it out." "I don't either," he admitted. "That's the problem." Megan stood slowly, still holding Sophie. "Then maybe we teach her together." Adrian blinked. The word "together" rang louder than she intended, but something shifted in his eyes. Not surprised? Hope he didn't say anything, just nodded. And in that moment, Megan knew this was no longer a chance encounter. It wasn't a story of charity, or kindness, or gratitude. It was something else. Something beginning. And deep down, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to see where it might lead. Adrian had always believed money could fix almost anything. Contracts, crises, companies, there was always a price. And he had learned to pay it without blinking. But now, standing in the hallway outside his daughter's nursery, watching a humble waitress comfort the child he hadn't been able to reach in weeks, he realized just how little his wealth meant in the world that truly mattered. He had a mansion with 6 bedrooms, but none of them had laughter. He had a personal chef, but Sophie wouldn't touch the food. And he had an entire staff trained to manage every detail of his life. Yet no one could calm his daughter's trembling hands. Except Megan. She sat with Sophie in the reading nook by the window now, turning the pages of a picture book with worn corners and colorful animals. Sophie leaned into her side, a sleepy smile tugging at the corner of her lips. It was the first Adrian had seen in days. "She likes the tiger best," Megan said softly, without looking up. "Says it reminds her of strength." "She hasn't said that to anyone else," Adrian replied, equally quiet. "She doesn't have to," Megan said. "Some things, you can just tell." Adrian felt his heart twist. It was strange, the more he watched Megan with Sophie, the more he realized how much he'd missed. Not just in the last few weeks, but in the last few years. Since his wife passed, he had thrown himself into work, drowned in boardrooms, meetings, red-eye flights, because staying still meant remembering, and remembering meant pain. But Megan wasn't afraid of silence or pain. She faced it with soft eyes and a kind voice and hands that soothed without expecting anything in return. "Would you stay for dinner?" Adrian asked suddenly. Megan blinked, surprised. "Are you sure? Sophie eats more when you're here." And that was all the reason she needed. That evening, they sat around a polished mahogany table that seemed too grand for such a simple meal. The cook had prepared a child-friendly spread: mashed potatoes, chicken tenders, steamed carrots shaped like flowers. But it wasn't the food that made the difference, it was the feeling. Sophie sat beside Megan, giggling as she tried to balance a carrot on her nose. Megan joined in, encouraging the game. Adrian watched, laughter bubbling up unbidden from his chest. It felt foreign. But good. After dinner, Megan helped tuck Sophie into bed. She sat beside her and told her a made-up story about a waitress who met a tiny dragon in the snow, a dragon who lost his fire and had to find it again through kindness. Sophie listened with wide eyes, then whispered, "Was the dragon me?" Megan smiled and kissed her forehead. "Maybe, or maybe you're the hero the dragon was waiting for." That night, Megan left quietly, unsure if she would be invited back. But before she reached the driveway, Adrian called out her name. "Would you consider coming again tomorrow?" he asked, not as a guest, as someone important in her life. Megan hesitated. "You mean like a nanny?" "No," he said. "I mean as you. You're already more than that." She didn't answer, but something flickered in her eyes, something tender and hesitant. Over the next week, she came every day. Not because he paid her, he offered, but she refused. She came for Sophie. They painted with their fingers, made forts from blankets and couch cushions, watched cartoons in pajamas, and danced barefoot in the living room to old jazz records. The house that had once been silent now echoed with music and laughter, and the sound of tiny feet running through hallways. And through it all, Adrian watched Megan not just as a caretaker, but as something else entirely. Someone who carried the kind of grace born from hardship. Someone who didn't see wealth as status, but as something empty unless shared. One afternoon, as they sat on the terrace drinking tea, he finally asked the question that had been haunting him. "How did you become the kind of person who gives away her last meal to a stranger?" Megan looked down at her cup. "Because once, someone gave me theirs. When I was 7, my mom left me at a bus station. A janitor found me, gave me half of his sandwich, and sat with me until help came. I never saw him again, but that moment his kindness had stayed." Adrian swallowed hard. "You became him." "I try," she said, "because I remember how it felt, to be seen, to matter." That night, he couldn't sleep. He walked through the halls of his own home, remembering every empty year since his wife's passing, remembering how quickly joy had faded, and how, in just days, Megan had brought it back not just for Sophie, but for him. She didn't do it with speeches or promises. She did it with presence, with compassion, with a heart so full it overflowed into everything she touched. But what haunted him most was this. What if she didn't stay? She had her own life, her own worries, and she had no reason to remain in his world of excess and loneliness, unless he gave her one, unless he showed her that she already belonged. The next morning, he made a call. Not to his assistant, not to a lawyer or investor, to the director of a nonprofit foundation for children in crisis. "I want to start something new," he said in her name. Her, a woman named Megan. A woman who saved my daughter? He didn't know it yet, but that decision would change everything again. Not just for Sophie, not just for Megan, but for every life waiting quietly on the edge of hope, wondering if kindness still existed in the world. And through her, he would prove that it did. The first snow of the season fell quietly over the city, blanketing streets and rooftops in a soft white hush. It was the kind of morning where everything felt still, like the world itself was holding its breath. Inside Adrian's home, a very different energy stirred. Sophie was spinning in socks across the polished wood floor, giggling as Megan chased her with a fuzzy scarf, pretending it was a magic ribbon. Adrian stood by the doorway, coffee in hand, watching them with a smile that felt easier each day. But behind that smile, something else had taken root, an urgency he could no longer ignore. He had built companies in weeks, closed million-dollar deals overnight, but rebuilding a broken family, he was learning, took something different, something slower, something deeper, and something far more courageous than contracts or negotiations. It took honesty. He stepped into the room, clearing his throat softly. "Can we talk?" he asked Megan, nodding toward the study. She glanced at Sophie, who was now buried under a pile of throw pillows, then nodded. The study, with its dark shelves and antique globe, had always felt cold to him, but now, with Megan sitting across from him in the high-backed chair, it felt like a space waiting for truth. "I've been thinking," Adrian began, "about everything, about how you came into our lives, and how different things are now." Megan offered a quiet smile, but her hands tightened slightly in her lap. "Different can be good. It is good," he said, "but it made me realize something important, something I haven't admitted out loud, not even to myself." She tilted her head, listening. "I was drowning," Adrian said softly. "After my wife passed, I went numb, threw myself into work, tried to fix everything with money, but Sophie, she was slipping away from me. I saw it happening, and I couldn't stop it." Megan's gaze softened, but she said nothing. "And then," Adrian continued, "you showed up. A stranger, with nothing but a sandwich and a heart that wouldn't walk past a little girl on the sidewalk." He looked her straight in the eyes. "You saved my daughter." Her breath caught, but she stayed still, grounded in the moment. "You don't need to say that," she whispered. "I just did what anyone with a heart would do." "No, Megan, that's the thing. Not everyone would." There was silence between them for a long beat. Then Adrian leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I don't know what your plans are. I don't know what your dreams look like. But I do know this: you've become part of this family, whether you meant to or not. And if you're willing, I want to build something that lasts. With you. Her eyes widened. What are you saying? He paused. It wasn't a proposal. Not yet. It was deeper than that. A beginning. An invitation. I'm saying, I want to offer you more than thanks. More than money. I want to offer you partnership. Not just in Sophie's life, but in something bigger. He stood and pulled a folder from the bookshelf behind him, laying it on the desk between them. This is the foundation I told you about. I filed the paperwork yesterday. It's called the Sophie Light Project, named after the moment that changed everything. It's for lost kids, abandoned ones, the ones no one sees. I want you to run it, shape it, lead it. Megan stared at the folder like it was something sacred. I don't have degrees, she said slowly. I've never run anything like this before. I know. That's why you're perfect. She looked up at him, and there it was again. Spark in her eyes, not pride, not ambition, but quiet purpose. A kind of knowing that didn't need permission. What made you trust me with this? She asked. Adrian gave a soft smile. Because you saw value in someone when the world didn't. And that's exactly what this foundation needs. Someone who doesn't need credentials to recognize worth. Tears welled in her eyes, not because she felt overwhelmed, but because, for the first time in a long time, someone had believed in her the way she always believed in others. From the hallway, the sound of small feet pattered closer. Sophie peeked into the study. Her curls tousled, a stuffed tiger in her arms. Are you staying, Megan? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Megan's eyes met Adrian's, and something quiet passed between them. A choice. She turned to Sophie and opened her arms. If it's okay with you, I'd love to. Sophie ran to her, burying her face in Megan's shoulder. Later that night, after the house fell into a peaceful silence, Megan stood on the balcony alone. Snowflakes drifted under the street lamps below. The city glowed like a secret whispered under the stars. She thought about her old apartment, her long shifts at the diner, the nights she counted tips and rationed hope. She thought about Sophie, about Adrian, about the chance to build something real, and she whispered into the cold night air, maybe I was the one rescued. After all, what she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that the story was far from over, because the past always has its own story to tell, and someone from Megan's past was about to step into the light. Everything was about to change. Again. The winter sky hung heavy, clouds low, like they were holding back something weighty. Snow, perhaps, or truth. At the breakfast table, laughter filled the room. Sophie had pancake batter on her nose, and Megan was mock scolding her with a wooden spoon, while Adrian stirred hot cocoa. The moment was warm, golden, a snapshot of something whole. But peace, real peace, is often just a pause before the past knocks on the door, and knock it did. A soft, uncertain rap echoed from the front entrance. Adrian exchanged a glance with Megan. Sophie had frozen mid-giggle, her eyes darting toward the hallway like she felt something neither of them could see. Adrian opened the door slowly. A woman stood there shivering, clutching a small worn purse. Her coat was too thin for the season, and her eyes, wild red-rimmed, searching, landed on the child behind him. Sophie, double quotes her names. Sophie, right? The woman rasped. Her voice was cracked like dry paper. I'm her mother. Megan's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, everything felt like it tilted sideways, like the world had just been unzipped and a secret had slipped out. Adrian stepped forward, protective. Who are you? The woman looked past him, straight at Megan, and something in her expression shifted recognition. Megan. Megan's knees buckled slightly, and she caught the back of the chair beside her. I know you. The woman nodded, her lips trembling. It's me, Kendra. The name struck a deep, hidden chord. A memory Megan hadn't pulled from in years. A foster home in a faraway town. Late nights whispering secrets under blankets. A promise to stay together. One that had shattered the day they were separated. I thought you were gone, Megan said, voice hoarse. I was, Kendra whispered, but I didn't mean for it to be forever. Sophie had taken a step forward, her small hand reaching for Megan's, without even thinking. Megan gently squeezed it, as if anchoring them both. Adrian spoke, his voice calm but firm. Where have you been? Do you have any idea what Sophie's been through? Tears streamed down Kendra's cheeks. I was sick, really sick. I ended up in a shelter, then on the street. I didn't want to leave. I told her to wait. I thought I'd be back in an hour. But it turned into days, weeks, and you didn't call the police, a shelter, anyone. Megan's voice had an edge, now sharp, not cruel, but cutting through the haze. I was ashamed, Kendra said, afraid they'd take her forever. I thought if I just got back on my feet, I could come for her. But when I finally did, she was gone, and I had no idea where. Sophie was silent. Her grip on Megan's hand had tightened. Megan knelt down, brushing a hand across the girl's cheek. Sweetheart, she said gently. Do you remember this woman? Sophie looked uncertain. She left me. She said she'd come back. The heartbreak in those 6 words settled over the room like dust. Kendra stepped forward slowly. I'm not asking for forgiveness right now. I needed to see her, to know she was safe. Adrian took a deep breath. She's safe. She's loved, but you need to understand something. You disappeared. You abandoned her. And in the meantime, she became part of a new life. One we've built with care. Megan stood. If you want to be part of her world again, it won't be on your terms. It will be on hers. And you'll have to earn her trust. Kendra nodded. I'll do whatever it takes. For the next few days, everything shifted. Kendra was allowed brief, supervised visits, short walks to the park, quiet hours at the house. At first, Sophie remained distant, unsure. But Megan noticed the way her eyes lingered on Kendra, sometimes cautious, remembering. Meanwhile, Megan and Adrian worked tirelessly to expand the Sophie Light project. Donations poured in after a feature story ran in the local newspaper. Their story of kindness, chance, and love had moved hearts and changed them. One night, weeks later, as snow drifted quietly against the windows, Sophie crawled into Megan's lap and whispered something so small. Megan almost missed it. "Can I have two moms?" Megan's throat tightened. She kissed Sophie's forehead. "You can have all the love your heart can hold." The next day, Megan sat with Kendra on a park bench while Sophie played under the bare trees. "I don't hate you," Megan said, staring out at the gray sky. "I wanted to for what you did. But I know what it's like to be lost, to think you don't deserve a second chance." Kendra nodded, eyes glossy with emotion. "I didn't expect mercy, but you gave it." Megan turned to her. "No, Sophie gave it. Kids don't care about our mistakes the way we do. They care about what we do now." The wind picked up, and Sophie came running back, cheeks flushed. "I'm cold," she squealed, leaping into Megan's arms and to everyone's surprise, extending her other arm toward Kendra. "Let's all go home." And just like that, something healed, not erased, but stitched. In the spring, the Sophie Light Project launched its first children's shelter. Megan stood at the ribbon with Adrian and Sophie beside her. Kendra was in the crowd, holding flyers, guiding volunteers, smiling through tears. That night, as twilight painted the sky with lavender and gold, Megan sat on the front steps of the house with Sophie in her lap. "Why do you think that sandwich changed everything?" Sophie asked suddenly. Megan smiled. "Because sometimes, one small kindness opens a door that never closes." Sophie leaned her head against Megan's shoulder. "I'm glad you found me," Megan whispered into her hair. "I think you found me." And somewhere, beneath a quiet sky and the hush of wind over new blooms, their story didn't end. It only began again, brighter, deeper, fuller than before, because some lost things aren't gone forever. They're just waiting to be found.